welcome to UpNerd. This week I have a special interview with Mat Bradley-Tschirgi, the writer of Star Trek Video Games, an unofficial guide to the final frontier. I enjoyed this book. If you enjoy Star Trek and you like video games, or if you just really like Star Trek enough that you will play Star Trek games, I highly recommend it. It's a fun kind of journey through some of the weirdest and best of the Star Trek video game universe. Feel free to reach out to Matt, let him know that you enjoyed the book. Maybe reach out and try to get a second one made, because man, there's a lot of Star Trek games. And without further ado, here is my discussion with Matt. Matt, how are you?
Doing good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. It's a fun book. It's interesting. I heard about it just randomly. I get the Diamond Comics shipping list every month, and I thought, like, that sounds interesting. And so I kind of picked it up on a whim.
Oh, that's cool. I had no idea it was on the Diamond list. The publisher, White Owl Books, is based out of the UK, so that was sort of interesting in itself. I'm based out of the US, and I mean that never really became an issue, except I think for the final round of edits they changed the spelling to all like UK spellings, which gave me a mild stroke, but it was...
as a Canadian, I think what you meant to say is the proper spelling.
Oh, sure, yes. No, I'm sure it's pretty similar to the Canadian stuff.
I'm going to start with the most important question, obviously. What do you think makes a good Star Trek game?
Oh, man, that's a big one. Yeah. So the Star Trek games are so different and I think so much more varied than the Star Wars games. And I have to make that comparison because it's hard not to. And in fact, this book started as a pitch about a book on Star Wars games. But it ended up not being what they wanted, but they liked the idea of Star Trek better, and I was fine with that. I like Star Trek as well. And so, but what makes a good Star Trek game? I think it's something that ideally deals with the team dynamic, where you're involved with different members of the crew somehow, and preferably something that makes you feel like you're involved in a... I like the story-based ones more, so something where there's more of like a story where you're making decisions. Like that feels more Star Trek to me than the ones that are more sort of action-oriented or so forth. Even, I mean, there's a pretty interesting one called Bridge Commander, where you're just the captain on the bridge giving commands to people, and while the gameplay is all like menu driven, it's not the most exciting thing in the world, it at least feels very much like Star Trek. So I think games that focus on those things work better than, I don't know, something like Star Trek Hidden Evil. I can't stand that game. It's a sequel of sorts to Star Trek Insurrection, where you play as like a random guy. You're not even one of the main members of the crew, and you're just kind of doing busy work for Picard and Data on the planet.
Ensign, you have been given an order.
Yes, sir. Sorry, sir.
And it feels like that's something where it could have been any license, really. It didn't feel especially Star Trek to me. So I would say just the whole crew dynamic is the most central thing.
How is Hidden Evil one of the games that's actually available now?
Yes, I did it.
And we have so many of these, like Final Unity and others, that just are barely playable or take a lot of work to get working.
Oh no, I think that's a great point. Getting the games to run on my Windows 11 PC was, harder than writing about them, for sure. It took a lot of work, and I had some experience with a PC emulation, but especially the Windows 95 and Windows 98 stuff, those were hard to get running at the time with all the nonsense with the drivers and graphics cards and all these things. And to get it running on modern computers is challenging. And part of the inspiration to write the book is I was pissed off that so few of the Star Trek games were out there. Because GOG made a big deal about having them, but it's only like 12 of them? Like, it's not even that many.
It's just a handful.
Yeah.
And even then, it's kind of hit and miss. Like, Hidden Evil's there, but not something like a Final Unity.
What do you suggest?
There's just a lot that isn't, and I think you look at the Star Wars stuff, most of that's available, and part of that is those were done in-house by LucasArts, mostly. But Star Trek, it was a lot of different third parties making these games that whoever, Paramount gave the license to at the time. And so it was kind of all over the place in terms of quality control and kind of titles. So I imagine getting in Paramount, I've heard, is challenging to work with. So there's that as well. So I mean, yeah, I do hope we get things like Final Unity, the games people actually want out there. I mean, they did, have things on there. The, Elite Force, like those games were big. The Armada games, like you said, Bridge Commander, but it's still just a drop in the bucket compared to everything.
25th anniversary, Judgment Rights, and the Starfleet Command games are quite good and well liked. But yeah, what was researching for the book like? Because yeah, there's a lot of these old games that are simply not available now to the modern day consumer, and that's even just the PC games, by the way. There's I don't know how many games that were released in the PlayStation 2 era, for example, that you'd have to have a PS2 for.
Sure. I mean, it all starts with I've done a few nonfiction books now, and it all starts with a table of contents, and you work with the publisher, and they give you a word count, and roughly a page is 250 pages, and so you kind of figure it backwards from there. Okay, if it's about 2 pages per game, it'll be X amount of games. There were some chapters that I cut when I was writing it because it was kind of exceeding the word count too much once I started putting the interviews in there. And in retrospect, I could have done more interviews maybe. I think those are some of the things I get the more positive feedback on about the book when I get any. But yeah, it's trying to narrow it down, I think, to the main ones. And it was more of a challenge, I think, to figure out how to organize the games in the table of contents. Because at first I thought it would be chronological. And then I looked at it, and it was very kind of off-putting because you're constantly bouncing between the different TV shows and different kinds of games. And I thought, well, wait a second. Star Trek, everyone that likes Star Trek has a favorite series. So you might as well organize it by that. And then the movies are their own kind of separate things and kind of do the newer stuff and go from there.
Oh, how did you decide on the interviews for the games? Because you mentioned, too, there were licensing issues, which is one of the reasons why some aren't available now. A lot of these companies, frankly, just don't exist anymore that did a lot of these Star Trek games.
Yeah, I kind of came from all over the place. I was sort of wanting a mixture of like journalists and writers and producers and stuff on the game, and some of it was through friends on Twitter, I guess now it's X, that they had interviewed people that they thought were good, or some people would reach out to me and said, hey, have you spoken to this person? So there was that. And some people were more available than others, and it just took time. I mean, in particular, there's what was the newest game at the time when I turned in the manuscript was Star Trek Resurgence, which is sort of a more story-based game, like along the lines of 25th anniversary or something. I mean, it's really by people from Telltale Games that did stuff like The Walking Dead, and Back to the Future and those kind of things. But anyhow, I reached out to them wanting to speak to one of the writers, and the head writer, Dan Martin, eventually got back to me right before a deadline, which was nice. But it was like, it can take a lot of different emails and Twitter messages and things to try to get a hold of someone because they don't know. I can mention who I am when they don't know who I am, and the publisher they might recognize, they might not. And so you're just one of a lot of people trying to contact these people, and sometimes they're retired, and that makes them easier. One of them I knew through a contact that I had on, there's an app called Clubhouse, which is like an audio chat room app, and I'm part of like a game design and a writer group on there, and I found a few people through there, so that was useful, but it kind of all over the place. I got who I could, and I think what I learned from doing this book is I was posting a lot about it on Twitter and LinkedIn and all that. And on LinkedIn especially, I would get comments after the book came out going like, hey, I would have liked to have been interviewed for the book. I worked on Star Trek Online or whatever it is. And so I'm doing another video game book. I can't reveal what the topic is for the same publisher, but I've done postings on LinkedIn about the topic of it. And that one has had like a whole lot of responses just for me kind of doing a more general post like, hey, if you worked on these things, please let me know. And I wish I would have done that for this book. It just didn't. I kind of did kind of the hard way of kind of looking at credits, trying to search people and contacting them individually instead of doing a more general query for them.
It's going to be tough too, because I mean, in some of these cases, hey, do you remember this game you worked on, 30 some odd years ago?
Yeah, 30 something odd years ago. Right. I mean, like, there's a funny story where it's not in the book because it happened afterwards, but this past August in 2024, I was on a panel about Star Trek video games for Star Trek to Las Vegas at the Rio. And it was run by the people that do the Inglorious Trexperts podcast. They had their own stage and needed to fill it with I was on stage with Dan Martin, who is the writer I mentioned earlier on Star Trek Resurgence, and with the Tipton brothers, who have done a lot of Star Trek comic books. And anyway, we were talking about these games, and the moderator, Mark A. Altman, mentioned, what's the weirdest Star Trek game? And to be fair, he said weirdest. He didn't say worst. And at that point, my brain was kind of shot. I didn't get much sleep before because it's Las Vegas. And so I just opened the book and point to a random title. I happened to speak about this first-person game. It's not available easily, called Star Trek Next Generation Klingon Honor Guard. So it's a first-person shooter where you play as a Klingon with mainly melee weapons, and it has kind of, puzzly level design, and I just didn't think it was very good. And so I talk about it, and then after the panel, I'm at the booth in the exhibitors hall. I didn't have copies of my book to give away, but I had little bookmarks or something I made with a QR code I was giving to people. And this guy says, the game Klingon Honor Guard you said was the weirdest game. Well, I was the head designer and writer on that game. And so this person in line just comes up to me, and I'm like, gosh. But we talked for 10 minutes, and he was a professional, and he mentioned he had also worked on the Star Trek Generations game on PC, which I thought was pretty cool. It just goes to show, the odds of a Star Trek game designer going to a panel like that at a Star Trek convention are pretty big, but that they'd happen to talk to me about a game I had mentioned on stage, that seemed kind of slim, and that was a real nervous moment there for a second, but it all ended up working out in the end.
Thank goodness it was weirdest, because you probably would have felt bad if it had been specifically worst.
I would have, right. And it's... the thing is, every game I think is someone's favorite, right? So yep. I tried to keep that in mind. I've been involved in game design. I've been involved in, writing these books. I've written short stories. I've done magazine articles. I've kind of done all sorts of things. So it all takes a lot of work. It's a miracle anything gets done, really.
An Uwe Bole movie is somebody's favorite movie.
Yes, yeah, no, my first book was the films of Uwe Bole, Volume 1, the video game movies, and it was the first English language book on Uwe Bole, and that led to him picking me to be the editor on his English language memoir. So I got to work with Uwe on that, which was an experience.
That's why I bring it up.
Yep, and that's called Uwe Bole Raw, a memoir, which I'd recommend people look at. It's a no-holds-barred look into his whole career to date, including some movies that aren't quite out yet. And I've never met him in person. I'd like to, but he's mostly in Germany these days. Mm-hmm. So that seems... It's not impossible that it will happen, but it seems fairly unlikely. So with this Star Trek book, I knew when it would come out that people would complain like, oh, I didn't cover this game, I didn't cover this game. And I got a little of that, but I also got just feedback of people sort of thankful that I was talking about these games no one really talked about. Because some of these, like you said, are really hard to get a hold of, and you can't play them. I mean, you have seen now on the modern consoles and even on Steam and stuff, they'll do compilations of like the Castlevania games or the Ninja Turtles games, or Jurassic Park, right? Some of these licensed things. So it's possible we could get like a Star Trek console game collection in the future. I think that'd be nice, but I also don't think it's very likely.
No, and one of the things I learned from good old games, for example, is that the rights are just held up by so many different companies, and it's difficult to pin down exactly who owns what, apparently.
It can be, yeah, especially if people have deceased or the rights were split up in some strange way. That's why you can't get Wizardry 1 through 5 available on those sites. We can get all the other ones. And the one that really kills me is I wish they'd have the old DUNE games, DUNE, the like Dune and Dune 2. Those are... especially that second one is
predecessor
important.
To every RTS game ever.
That's right, yeah. Command and Conquer and all Warcraft, all of those owe a lot to that game, and it would be nice to have it available legitimately, but there's issues with the Herbert estate from what I understand, so maybe one day we'll see those too, but I'm glad that something like GOG exists, and They've come a long way since how they started, that's for sure.
So you mentioned playing some of the more obscure ones being difficult. Did you end up going back and playing the games that are listed in the book?
Yeah, I played all the games I talk about in the book, including some I didn't talk about. Some of them I thought were just really bad, and so I chose not to write about them. One in particular that I even interviewed Kat Bailey, a journalist, I talked to her about some of the other games, and she talked at length about the Star Trek game that came out after the J.J. Abrams movie, the third-person co-op thing with Kirk and Spock. And that one I wrote a chapter and put her interview in there, and then I just cut it because I hate that game so much, and I had to cut something.
But it was delightfully glitchy at points with your partner getting stuck in places, which was so much fun.
The partner getting stuck, the camera screwing up. I mean, then if you try to play it single player with the AI, with the co-op partner, it was at a point where they seemed like every game needed to have co-op, which I think made a lot of games worse in some ways because it's harder to design for.
Yeah, that one in particular seemed to kind of be inspired by Gears of War style thing, where you were kind of crouching behind chest-high walls and poking out, and you were supposed to get help from your partner, which if it was not a human being, you were in a lot of trouble.
Right, yeah, the sort of stop and pop kind of shooters, and when you have a camera that's just jittery. I mean, the one thing I did like about that game was how the Enterprise looked, and it did all the J.J. Abrams lens flares. Like, that kind of brief moment with the music felt cool, and they got the actors from the movie, which was nice. And that always helps with these games when you get the real voice actors. I mean, it's not for a lot of the game, but there's like a mobile game, Star Trek Timelines, where they have John Delancey as Q kind of insulting you every now and then, and it's nice to hear his voice pop up as the game loads sometimes.
Easily the best part of Star Trek Borg as well, which somebody has recently, by the way, made playable in a desktop browser, and so you can enjoy Q himself insulting your performance on a regular basis.
That's right, yeah, and they upscaled the video too, which was cool. Yeah, so I'm trying to think of games from the book that stand out to me. Like Star Trek, the game show, I was really impressed with. It's kind of like You Don't Know Jack meets Star Trek, with John Delancey as Q as one of the hosts. That, I think, is a fun format, and that's something you could do as a mobile game or kind of as a web game as well, I think, and it would do pretty well.
Remember, I have the fun. You suffer the consequences.
But just so much of these things, and I guess out of these ones that aren't available, some of the ones I'm sort of most surprised at are things like Starfleet Academy or Klingon Academy, the kind of Wing Commander knockoffs with full motion video.
Yeah, Starfleet Academy is available in some places, but yeah, Klingon Academy is an odd one. You touched on it before. It's interesting what is and isn't available, and it's just too hard to cover everything in terms of Star Trek. You know, you mentioned earlier too, like there's Elite Forces, for example, which you have an entry for. Well, there's Elite Forces 2, which exists and is not as good as the first game, but it's very similar gameplay. So, I mean, you know, is it worth a completely separate entry to it or not? There's just no way to cover everything, though, and there's no reason necessarily to cover everything. There's a billion and one, you know, DS titles that could have been in there.
Not just that, but you mentioned the Star Trek 25th anniversary, and I cover the versions on the NES and the PC. But, I mean, there was versions on Game Boy, on just about every system imaginable, and each one is a separate game, despite having the same title. And I think only one of them was actually released on Star Trek's 25th anniversary, on top of that. So, some of the stuff in here was like, I think only one of them was unreleased. There's Star Trek the Final Frontier, the NES game, which leaked online a while back, and that is just this not very good side-scroller, but it's so bizarre. I thought that was fun to write about. A lot of people have asked me about Star Trek Secret of Vulcan Fury. Do you know about that one?
Yeah, which didn't come out, but certain files were made available. There have been fan attempts to get the game working fully for what was there. It was planned as the third of sort of that trilogy of original series point-and-click games, where we had Star Trek 25th Anniversary and then Star Trek Judgment Rights, both both when I'm saying this, I mean the PC versions, but they were planning a Vulcan Fury game with the with the actors themselves, and it was written by, I believe it was DC Fontana.
Yep.
And yeah, it just never came to be.
I mean, it was far enough along where they did full-page advertisements in magazines. It was on the back of cereal boxes. Some video have come out that played at E3, where at the time, they would have been really impressive. From what I understand, not much of the game was completed. I heard the whole thing was written. I don't think there's that much of the voice acting that was done. DeForest Kelley had passed by that point, so they were going to use some actor as a sound-alike. Since the book has come out, I've worked with trying to reach out to the DC Fontana estate to see what's become of it. I had heard somewhere that she had wanted to do a novelization based on the game and could never get it working with Paramount, and that would quite be something just to see the game design document or how much existed from her end. Because, in one of the versions of Star Trek Judgment Rights, it was one of the CD-ROM collector's versions that came with an extra disc with some video interviews of Leonard Nimoy, and on one of them he teases the Secret of Vulcan Fury game, and he's like, and you can find out when you join me on Vulcan, and as Spock in Secret of Vulcan Fury. So that's kind of a neat clip, but yeah, that's one of those that got away. You mentioned Final Unity. I mean, there was a follow-up game to that was in development that never came out. There was a Star Trek First Contact game that never came out, which that would have made a lot of sense with the video game, right? Having Next Generation and the Borg. And instead, what do we get out of the Next Generation movies? We get, like Star Trek Generations, which is okay, and you get like Hidden Evil, which is Insurrection, which is nobody's favorite. So
so I'm going to get messages. Thanks a lot.
I guess you'll get messages from the three people that like the movie because Data says he could double as a flotation device when they're in the lake and he blows up like a... I did some work with the NFT game company on a licensed... we had a license based on the Walking Dead TV show to do some stuff. And working with the licensee gets really complicated because it can really limit what you can do in some ways. On the one hand, you have this property that people recognize, whether it's Walking Dead or Star Trek or whatever it is. But on the other hand, you're pretty limited what you have to go through, what you can do with it in some ways. And a lot of stuff has to go through legal, which kind of slows down the process. And there'll be changes that seem kind of arbitrary, and it's a lot of last minute things. And I think in one of the interviews in here I have with Michael A. Stackpole, who was a writer on 25th Anniversary and Judgment Rights, but also wrote like a lot of the Star Wars X-Wing novels back on the day, and among other things. He mentioned at the beginning Paramount was like so restrictive that he sort of told them, I'm paraphrasing here, but it's like, would you rather us just have a Star Trek game in which like nothing at all happens? And they're like, yes, that'd be great. Mm-hmm. Because they're so concerned either with canon or doing things too outside the box. But on the other hand, it's a computer game, so you want people to not just be coloring in the lines all the time. And I think after doing the 25th Anniversary game, they loosened up a bit more for Judgment Rights. But at first, they weren't wanting like any side characters from the show or any references to any episodes or anything. They're just being making stuff, not as fun as it could be for them in the beginning.
Something you mentioned earlier with what it makes a good Star Trek game, it's also a lot more difficult because, one of the central themes around Star Wars is that W word, war. It's a lot easier to make a video game with conflict, battles, and that kind of thing versus one of the major elements in Star Trek is kind of meant to be a little more cerebral. It's a little... There's supposed to be more things around your shooty shoot in Star Trek. And so when you strip out that element completely, it can be a little difficult. And I'm sure, Paramount's probably a little protective of that.
Yeah, I would think so. Despite that, we got, they did a game on Star Trek Prodigy, which was an animated show with only 2 seasons, called Supernova, but it's a pretty plays kind of like Baby's First Diablo or something. It's a 2-player co-op thing, and the cutscenes are just not even fully animated a lot of the time. It's these kind of comic book storyboards with light animation and sound effects, which feels a bit cheap. It has voices from the show and stuff, but still, you're kind of wanting, and for better or worse, Star Trek, you're expecting something a lot better than Star Wars, and I'm not quite sure why that is. Maybe because it's been around for longer, or it's the better episodes or allegories for things like race relations or Vietnam War or any number of things. So yeah, it's a more heady concept for sure. And there's an early game in here that I was pretty impressed with called the Kobayashi Alternative, that while it's a text adventure, it still pops up all these text boxes all over the place with people trying to communicate with you on the ship or from the ship. And you get that sort of sense of exploration on a planet and having to work with the crew. And even though it's text, I was pretty impressed with what it was trying to do there. I believe you had mentioned EGA Trek.
That was my first game, personally. I went back and I played stuff like Kobayashi Alternative as well, too, when I was much, much younger. But yeah, EGA Trek, I mean, I played it when it came out, essentially. And it was new, and that was kind of my first Star Trek. And eventually I got into... I had the 25th anniversary PC, I had the NES version, I eventually got the Game Boy version. I was all in on Star Trek pretty early on. So I've played most of these just because it had Star Trek in the title. You mention in the book, I mean, there are varying degrees of quality, we will say, to a lot of the Star Trek games. And I mean, as somebody who loves Star Trek, I'm just always desperate for them. There haven't been a lot of releases over the years, so I'll just take what I can get. I was overjoyed, by the way, with Resurgence. I actually reviewed it on this show, but I loved it because it encompassed a lot of what we talked about, in that there is quite a bit of problem solving and quite a bit of dialogue in between sort of action sequences to it.
Yeah, and I like that it switches between the two characters. I think that helps, where one is the second in command, the XO, and the other is the engineer, and they have sort of different things you have to do. And thankfully, it lets you skip the action or stealth sequences if you're not doing too well at them, which I think is a nice touch, because it doesn't control as good as, say, like a Wing Commander or a Metal Gear Solid, but it's trying to do those things, which sometimes it's more successful than others, but that it even lets you go into mission briefings and make these dialogue choices, and it has these cameo appearances from different characters. It's really just a lot of fun, and it does feel like you're in a lost kind of next generation Star
Yeah, I was going to
Trek
say,
episode.
it felt like an episode, which is kind of rare for a lot of these games.
But looking over this book, I mean, one thing that was a late addition that I'm glad I did was add a glossary to it, because as I was writing it, I'm like, well, wait a second. Some of these games are like 40 or 50 years old. People might not know what EGA means or all these different terms. And I thought it wasn't going to be very long, but it kept on, I think it's like, 5 or 6 pages or something of just defining these things, because you have no idea of who the audience for this is going to be. And I figured, well, because it's Star Trek, they might get into this because it's Star Trek, but not because they like computer games. And I was limited to do like 3 pictures per game, which are in color, which is a nice touch. But I decided to make one of the pictures the title screen, because I thought that was something very important for especially the older games, because you would be playing these things over and over again, trying to beat them, or if you're renting it, you're just trying to get to the next level, and you see the title screen over and over again with all the times you die. And I thought, well, if you're trying to get nostalgia in people, you want to take a look, and the title screen, I think, is a big part of that.
Out of all of them that you ended up playing and covering in this book, do you have a favorite?
Do I have a favorite? Yeah, that's a tricky question. It depends on what mood I'm in. I mean, I'll tell you what, like one that really surprised me a lot was the Star Trek Next Generation game on the Game Boy, where it's just a simulator and you're doing these kind of quick missions and you're going between different parts on the ship, like engineering or weapons and so forth. And there's a quick pick up and play thing. That one was one I was impressed with. I would say also, like Judgment Rights, I liked a lot. And Klingon Academy I thought was a lot of fun. I mean, I'm a sucker. We talked about Wing Commander before, so I'm a sucker for the full motion video stuff. But you're having Christopher Plummer and David Warner reprise their roles as the Klingons from Star Trek VI in the game. It's a prequel to that movie in a sense. But you get a quality of acting and makeup that's just a lot better than anything else you would see in sort of competing games at that time.
What a fine collection of warriors. So eager for battle. Are you prepared to destroy your enemy? Really? Today, you will fire the first shots in a campaign that will lead to the destruction of the Federation. This campaign is not real, but I assure you, it will be worse than real.
And I think that was cool to see.
It was fun to kind of go through memory lane for me, and then it was fun to go through and get information from the interviews and from some of the sort of notes you have, not to mention get your feelings on some of these games that I grew up with or played at different points in my lifetime. So, I mean, if you enjoy Star Trek and you enjoy video games, I think your book is an absolute must-have. It would be nice if we had more of these games available. I mean, I wish for a compilation or something, aside from stuff like, Star Trek Online and Prodigy Supernova, and then the mobile games, which, I mean, to be fair, may also get shut down at any point. But so many of these are not available, and it's almost like a fun sort of time capsule through a lot of them.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you liked it. Yeah, I mean, one I think would be a natural for them to bring back is Star Trek Legacy. I thought was a pretty cool title, where it was on PC and Xbox 360, and the idea was it was a storyline spanning, the original 5 series, so Enterprise, the original series, Next Generation, DS9, and Voyager, and they got all the original actors of the captains to reprise their roles. And you're commanding, sort of a smaller squadron of about 5 ships or so. But that one, I think, with the voice acting and kind of the story that leaps between the different series is pretty fun, and one that I think on the Xbox 360 played pretty well, but on the PC it was something where you kind of, because it's a PC game, you're kind of expecting more like a full-throated RTS, more along the lines of Armada, and when you're comparing having not that many ships to move around, it feels like it's missing a little something. But I like the ambition of that. And man, yeah, to talk about it in Vegas was cool, and the questions from the audience was pretty difficult because it's a Star Trek audience, and they know their stuff, and they were trying to correct me on stuff sometimes, which was,
If you show weakness, they'll tear you apart.
yeah, if you show weakness, they'll tear you apart. I mean, I think everyone was pretty polite and everything, but some of these people were like, oh, well, you mentioned Star Trek or what is it, Star Trek Enterprise. Didn't have its own game, but they feature in Star Trek Online and Star Trek Legacy, and there's this mod for this game that's Star Trek Enterprise, so that's a Star Trek Enterprise game. And it's like, okay, yeah, but it's not an official game. And I mean, there's certainly enough Star Trek titles that if there was to be a volume 2 of this book, which who knows, maybe there might be at some point, there's enough things I could cover. And of course, when this, right as after the deadline, when I turned it into the publisher, a new Star Trek game was announced that I couldn't include, which was Star Trek Infinite.
Well, it's probably for the best, because that is one at some point I will discuss on my show. But yeah, I had such high hopes for it, so I pre-ordered it. I know Stellaris, I mean, I have it, and I was looking forward to that kind of style, that 4X experience of explore, communication, that sort of stuff to it. And it came out, was supported for 6 months, and then Paradox kind of just dropped it and axed everybody from the company, which was unfortunate because it was clearly a labor of love for a lot of the devs on it. And it really hurt that, they really didn't get to take it where they wanted to. It was kind of launched a little early, we'll say. It was buggy, that kind of thing, but they just weren't given the time and the opportunity to fix it up and work on it further.
Right, it was launched a bit early. It didn't seem like they did a whole lot of promotion for it. It just was like, hey, the Star Trek game's coming out really soon. And there was so much of people comparing it to the fan mods that were on Star Trek for Stellaris, which I think took a bit of the wind out of the sails. And had it not been based on the Stellaris engine, maybe it could have been more of its own thing, or maybe people wouldn't have compared it as much. Because it had been a long time since there'd been a game like that for Star Trek, which is too bad. But you never know. I mean, there could be some more of those some days, and there's obviously going to be more Star Trek games coming out at some point. I mean, I just can't believe Star Trek Online is still going on.
Yeah. I remember being in the beta test for it.
Yeah, I was in the beta test for it as well. I signed up at, what is it, at the PAX Prime in Seattle at the 2009 convention. And then it proceeded to be, I think the people that signed up at that convention, all the emails got hacked or something. So everyone got a whole lot of spam. But that's neither here nor there. But yeah, no, it was the book was a lot of fun.
I don't know that anything sums up the Star Trek gaming experience better than that, to be fair, though.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a Star Trek video game fan, you really are in it for the long haul, and some of these games are better than others, and especially, you kind of get anything with Star Trek on it, like you were saying. It would be cool if more of these Star Trek games come out. I hope they do, but yeah, otherwise, yeah, I hope the book's a fun look at through memory lane of these different games, past and present, and yeah, if you have a smartphone, I think those are some of the easier ones to get. Play them while you still can. Like you said, all those things can be pulled or stopped at any time. I mean, there's the one on iPhone is pretty strange, Star Trek Legends.
Yeah, which is now available actually on Steam as well, too.
Is it? Yeah, I wonder if because the Star Trek Legends, originally it was on Apple Arcade, which is a paid subscription service, and it was pretty clear they seem to have taken out some
loot boxes.
But yet it's still pretty damn grindy. So I wonder if that's still the case on the Steam version.
Yes.
It is? Okay, that's too bad, because those things are fun up to a certain point, and then it's like, I don't want to replay this mission 20 times to just get my ass kicked in the next one over and over again. And it's
again, what sums up the Star Trek video game experience better?
Right. No, it's a great point.
We exist for pain sometimes, you see, and yeah, thanks again for writing it. I thought it was fascinating and it's interesting, and yeah, I've played through all these. Like I say, Legacy is one. I remember picking that up day and date it came out. I got it for the 360 because I can't remember. I think my PC was a potato at the time. And yeah, now maybe I have found ways to run it on my PC that are extracurricular, but it's the only way to play half of these. Yeah,
which is too bad. I'm convinced we'll see. Certainly more came out on GOG than the initial 5 titles or so. There's been a few waves of them, so hopefully we'll see more on there, and you never know. I mean, I think, you mentioned the full motion video on Borg. There's also Klingon. I think those would be a natural, but really Final Unity is one that people really enjoyed. It was the first one to have the voices of the Next Generation crew, and to pick your own crew to beam onto the planets to explore what's going on, and something that's more, narrative based, I think speaks more to the Star Trek experience as compared to like the Sega Genesis and SNES game, the Futures Past Next Generation game, which I don't think was that great, where you beam to a planet and then you're just kind of shooting things with phasers.
Yeah, just like every episode.
Well, yeah, like every episode, and try not to walk into walls and all these sort of things.
Yeah,
I mean,
don't you remember Riker's chronic wall walking into problem?
That's right. Yeah, he would walk into walls, and in season 5 especially, there's a lot of that, and he would step over the chair to sit down just because he was so exhausted. His muscles were so sore from walking into all those walls. I'll be curious to see what Star Trek games the future brings, and I'm pretty pleased that on the cover of the game, of my book, they used a graphic I gave them from the Star Trek NES game where it's Kirk and Spock, and a friend of mine described it as like, it looks like Star Trek meets King of the Hill. especially with the version of Kirk on there, and it's hard to unsee it with the way the chin is drawn.
I loved those Turbo Lift chats so much when I was a kid. Anyway. Probably still love them now. So yeah, I want to say thanks again, and thanks again for coming on. What do you have out there or upcoming that you want to bring up?
I have a book. It's not out yet. It should come up to pre-order in a few months, but I have one coming out about the films of Eddie Murphy.
Star Trek 4 could have been on that list, by the way.
That is true. I do mention that in the book. Yeah, Star Trek 4 was originally going to have Eddie Murphy in one of the parts. And he turned it down from what I heard because he wanted to be up there in the ship in outer space with the crew. He didn't want to be, as Eddie Murphy described it, telling them how to speak jive on 1980s San Francisco. He wanted to be a main part of the story and be in space and fighting aliens and stuff, and I don't blame him. So
I want to do that now.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think also had Eddie Murphy been in that, it would have been distracting, and it would have been, the Eddie Murphy show, because he was in like just about every Paramount movie, it feels like. And it's another 80s movie Eddie Murphy was supposed to be in? Who Framed Roger Rabbit? He was supposed to be the detective.
Yeah.
And that would have been not as good, I don't think.
Yeah.
I like Eddie Murphy, but it would have taken you out of it again, and they wouldn't have had him play kind of the straight man. I think Bob Hoskins is so serious in that movie; it really helps a lot.
We were almost robbed of nuclear vessels and of
what could have been, right? Otherwise, I mentioned the Uwe Bole memoir. I was an editor on Uwe Bole Raw, a memoir. Check that out. And then if you like the video game stuff, there's an older book I did called Simply the Best: Interviews with Video Game Designers, Composers, and Scofflaws. That it's interviews I conducted while I was in college in like 2004 to 2005, so right before all the HD stuff started. And that was, I talked to Yoshitaka Amano, who did the illustrative concept art for Final Fantasy. I talked to George, the Fat Man Sainer, who did the music for the original Wing Commander, but also Seventh Guest and stuff like that. So
I have his vinyls.
Yeah, no, his stuff is great. But so that talks to a good mixture of game designers from back in the 80s and 90s. I think back in a time when it was frankly easier to get a hold of these people. And also being a college student helps when you're trying to get interviews. I think now it's too easy to get a hold of people in some ways, and I think that makes it more difficult to track down.
You could still try the college student thing.
I could, right. I guess they never ask for your ID, right?
Yeah, they don't know.
Yeah.
Thanks for the tip. I'm going to try it.
Yeah, I think you'll have success with it. But yeah, if you go to MATWBT.com, that'll get you to my Amazon page where you can purchase the books and so forth.
Hello, Mr. Resner. I am in college. Oh, sorry. Anyway. No, thanks again.
You're welcome.